capture. We're looking to depart 30 at 10:42.
Copy, 10:42.
And that's the call we've been waiting for from Flight Engineer Serena Anand Chancellor, confirming that the crew is ready for Dragon to move out of that 30-meter radius and into about 10 meters or 32 feet away from the International Space Station. Team was giving her a report that of the time necessary for the right lighting conditions, 10:42 being a GMT time. That would be 4:42 a.m. Central Time. If the procedure goes ahead on the timeline expected, Dragon would be arriving at the capture point at 4:42 a.m. Central Time. And then the team on the ground would hopefully give the crew a go for capture just a few minutes later at 4:50 a.m., given that they could be capturing the Dragon at 5 a.m. Central Time. While we're waiting for the go-ahead for Dragon to move out of the 30-meter range and into its capture point at 10 meters, we'll take a few more of the Ask NASA questions, and you can submit your own using the hashtag AskNASA on Twitter. This one coming from Jimmy asking how long can and do astronauts stay on the space station? The typical stay is about 6 months, but astronauts can stay longer than that. In fact, for instance, Scott Kelly stayed almost a year on board the space station. Next up, we have Abe Key asking, how does the space station come back to Earth? It comes back to Earth similar to other spacecraft by first undocking from the International Space Station and moving a safe distance away from it. Then it basically fires its jets to put the brakes on, slowing it down so that it will drop into the Earth's atmosphere. And that allows it to begin its descent and ultimately land in the ocean for retrieval. This question coming in from Takumi asking, on behalf of her 8-year-old, how many hours do astronauts sleep to stay healthy during the mission? They have the normal number of hours, about 8, scheduled on their daily timeline, so that they are not the many activities that teams here on the ground need them to perform don't encroach on their sleep time. They also, of course, spend about 2 hours a day working out to make sure that they are able to maintain their bone density and muscle mass and stay healthy for when they return to Earth. And here's one from Hassan asking how often astronauts on the space station communicate with their families and friends on Earth. That is up to the astronaut. They can do it on a very regular basis, as often as really we can here on Earth, because they have a phone that they're able to use for that. It's not unusual for them to call friends and family using that phone just as they have an opportunity or a few free minutes, but they also have specially scheduled times when they're able to do video conferences with their friends and family on the ground as well.
Station Houston on Space Ground 2 for Dragon.
One, two.
All right, Dragon is ready to proceed to the capture point. Expect approach to resume shortly.
Copy, Houston.
Capcom Neil Nagata there informing the crew that SpaceX is ready to move into the capture point. That is, again, moving out of that 30-meter hold area and into the 10-meter radius for capture. That'll bring it to about 32 feet away from the International Space Station, well within reach of the space station's 60-foot-long robotic arm. And at this point, it does look like we'll be a little past 5 a.m. for the final capture. Right now, the team here on the ground is estimating they're about 34 minutes away.
30 meters. Monitor per step 5 and 1.102.
Copy, step 5.
Can see here on this view that shows you the screen that the astronauts see as they monitor the Dragon's approach, that we are beginning now to move out of that 30-meter hold area. Moving at a rate of about 0.04 miles per hour at the moment.
Houston Station on 2 for Block Bravo.
I'm with you on 2.
Okay, Neil, pretty much monitor 1 and 3 are the same, and the only changes that we do see the circle offset from a corridor center by about half of vehicle width forward. Other than that, the vehicle size is relative to the outline.
All right, copy that, Serena. That's a good report.
SpaceX Dragon, as you can see here, continuing to move closer to the International Space Station, now about 21 meters or 68 feet away. It's aiming for a spot 10 meters away from the International Space Station, or 32 feet. And that will put it within reach of the space station's robotic arm, which will be driven by Space Station Commander Alex Gerst of the European Space Agency and NASA's flight engineer Serena Anand-Chancellor, who will be his backup. In addition to those two, newest flight engineer for NASA at the space station, Anne McLean.
Next scheduled communications pass. We're working on filling that gap, and just wanted to give you a heads up now. So in 10 minutes, we're going to go ahead and call you back and give you a status of where that's going to put us for today's activities.
Copy, Houston.
As I was saying, NASA's newest flight engineer in space, Anne McLean, is also with Gerst and Anand-Chancellor. She's monitoring telemetry as the Dragon approaches the space station. And Neil Nagata there calling up to the crew that the team here on the ground is working to fill a possible comm gap that is the result of a problem with one of the TDRS satellites being used today. Looking to use a different TDRS, and hopefully that won't affect the operations today, but they'll keep an eye on it and give the crew another call as they know more. As the Dragon continues to move in towards the space station, we'll take a few more Ask NASA questions. Again, you can send yours in using the hashtag AskNASA. And this one from Paul, asking what is being controlled by people on the ground versus people on the station. And right now, most of the operations are being controlled by people on the ground, either here in the Mission Control Center in Houston or at SpaceX's flight control team in Hawthorne. But once the SpaceX Dragon does get into that 10-meter range, or 32 feet spot away from the space station, the crew on board will be actually driving the robotic arm. They'll be the ones reaching out to capture the Dragon and grabbing onto it. And then they will turn control back over to the ground, who will then use the robotic arm controlling it from here to move it in for an actual berthing on the station's Harmony node. Another question from Panda Hill asking what time zone the space station uses and when will they celebrate Christmas and New Year's. The space station uses Greenwich Mean Time, GMT, because that is about halfway between the two main control centers here in Houston and also in Russia, although, of course, there are control centers all around the world. But that's a happy medium. And so they work on Greenwich Mean Time, a little ahead of the team here on the ground, a little behind the team in Russia. And that means that they actually kind of have their choice of when to celebrate Christmas, or not so much Christmas, but New Year's. They celebrate Christmas generally about the same time we do here on the ground, but New Year's they can celebrate a few times as they pass over different time zones throughout the day. They'll see, again, 16 revolutions around the Earth that day, so they'll have a few chances to cross them in that line. From Royston, we have this question asking if there is always a way for the crew to leave the space station. And yes, definitely. We use the same vehicles that they take to the space station, the Soyuz at the moment, as their emergency escape vehicles. If there were a problem, they would get into those and come home, and could do so pretty much any time. And that will continue to be the case as we have new spacecraft bringing the crew into space and to the space station. Whatever vehicle they come up on will continue to be their escape vehicle. So in the future, in addition to Soyuz, we'll have the Boeing CST-100 Starliner and the SpaceX Crew Dragon, which will be delivering people beginning next year. And from Alexandra asking, do astronauts maintain hobbies on the space station? And they do. They're able to, if they have free time, take part in any of the hobbies that they've chosen to continue doing while they're in space. Not every hobby will translate to zero gravity, but we do see the crew members doing a number of different things that they like to do on the ground. In the past, we've had crew members who sewed in space. A lot of crew members are interested in photography. I know that we have a number of crew members who have played various musical instruments in space. And Anne McLean, who just arrived, is a rugby player, and although she is not actually able probably to participate in a full-on rugby game, she did bring a rugby ball to the space station with her. One last one for now from Amy asking, will the crew celebrate holidays with a day off? We do try and give the crews days off for holidays whenever we're able. Occasionally, operations will get in the way of that, but if that does turn out to be the case, they usually get a makeup day off sometime in the future. However, at this point, we expect them to be able to take Christmas off on December 25th as we would here on the ground.
Houston Station on 2 for Block Bravo. Everything looks pretty centered up on both monitors.
Copy and concur. Thank you.
Flight Engineer Christina on Chancellor giving a report of what the crew is seeing on board the space station. Everything looking pretty good. The Block Bravo that she mentions asks the crew to report on the cameras they're using, any discrepancies between the views, the light within the approach corridor, and the vehicle size relative to the outline that you see here on the screen. And as you can see, SpaceX getting a lot bigger in the views of the space station's external cameras. This one showing it now about 12 meters away, 39 feet. And you can also see there right in the center of the screen, the silver circle, which has the prong on it that the space station robotic arm will use to grab onto the SpaceX Dragon and bring it in for its berthing later this morning. Now the team here on the ground is estimating that the capture itself is about 8 away.
And Station Houston on Space to Ground 2 for Dragon.
On two.
Okay, Serena, got a couple things here. We're going to confirm the capture point hold per step 6 in 1.102. And with respect to that ground failure I told you about, we're still working it, and I'll get you a status here in the next couple minutes.
Copy. We'll proceed with step 6 and then waiting to hear your words. Houston Station on 2, capture conditions confirmed and crew ready for Dragon capture.
And Houston, copy, standby 1.
Crew reporting that they're ready for the capture, waiting on the go from here on the ground. Now that the SpaceX Dragon has moved into that capture point about 10 meters away from the space station, 32 feet away, now they'll be moving the space station's arm into position to grab onto the Dragon so that it can be brought in for docking.
And Station Houston on space to ground 2 for Dragon.
For Dragon.
Okay, Serena, given our comm conditions now, we're going to ask you to command a retreat to 30 meters.
Copy. Commanding retreat to 30 meters.
So that call from Capcom Neil Magada asking the crew to retreat to the 30-meter hold point again.
Due to the failure on the ground here, we will be losing our next compass, and we will be back with you at around 11:50.
Copy on the comm and 11:50.
As I was saying, the team here on the ground asking the crew to, or letting the crew know that the Dragon will move back to the 30-meter hold point out of this 10-meter that we had moved into. This is due to a problem with one of the teacher satellites that was providing comm to the crew, and between the crew and the ground, rather. Due to an issue with it, the next...
Copy and concur.
Due to a problem with one of the teacher satellites, we're going to go through a period without communication between the ground and crew that was unexpected, and because of that, they're moving the SpaceX Dragon back into the 30-meter hold position, a little further away from the space station, just for safety. We expect to get the communications back with the crew at about 5:50 a.m. Central Time. That's about 45 minutes away now. So we'll have a wait longer than expected today, and we will not be hearing from the crew between now and then. We'll wait until we pick back up with them to get started back in the operations for today's capture. So again, we will be having a delay in capture today due to this issue with the TDRS satellite. So we will wait until we get connection with the next TDRS to pick up in the operations. Though we're out of communications now with the crew and don't expect to get it back for about 45 minutes, the team here on the ground is seeing good opening rate from the SpaceX Dragon as it moves back into that 30-meter hold point. So everything looking good, and for all the systems on board, we'll just have to wait until we get our next communication satellite so that we can get back into communication with the crew and get back into operations for today's capture. Flight Director Rick Hempling's been going over the updated plan with the team here in the flight control, the Space Station Flight Control Center. flight control room rather, based on today's delay of capture due to a problem with the teacher satellite that caused us to lose communications with the crew from here on the ground for about 45 minutes. We expect to get that back just right after 5:50 a.m. Central Time. In the meantime, everything is in a good config to hold, and that shouldn't be any problem. Just will mean a delay in the actual capture time. When we do get communications back with the crew at about 5:50 a.m. Central Time, they will have been the SpaceX Dragon will have moved back to that 30-meter hold point. It should be getting close to that about now, in fact. So we'll start over from that 30-meter hold point and push back into the 10-meter hold, getting it into about 32 feet of the International Space Station for the robotic arm to pick up and capture. No reason to think that any of this will be a problem for the systems on board. Just a delay in the activities. The SpaceX Dragon flight control team is able to confirm now that the Dragon is at that 30-meter hold point again. That means once we are able to reestablish the communication with the International Space Station just after 5:50 a.m. Central Time, we should be seeing them at that 30-meter hold point, so they'll be able to then push back to the 10-meter hold, or 10-meter capture point, which is about 32 feet away from the International Space Station. That's the point that it will actually be grabbed by the robotic arm at. Again, everything in good configuration now, just a delay in today's capture due to loss of communication with the International Space Station, unexpected due to a problem with one of the TDRS satellites that provides that communication. We'll pick up with a different TDRS satellite just after 5:50 a.m. Central Time, so about 30 minutes from now. This is Mission Control Houston. You're continuing to see a live view inside the space station flight control room where the flight control team is waiting communication restoration to the International Space Station. To better explain what exactly happened that took it out, there was a problem not with the satellite itself, the teacher satellite that we use to communicate with the space station, but actually with some of the equipment at White Sands that allows us, White Sands complex in New Mexico, that allows us to talk to that satellite. One of those processors that allows us to talk to the satellite failed, and so they are resetting it, but in the meantime, we'll be actually switching to a different teacher satellite that does not have a problem about 35 minutes from now. It'll be coming up at about 35 minutes from now, coming up at a little after 5:50 a.m. Central Time. Excuse me, 25 minutes from now, again at a little after 5:50 a.m. Central Time. That's when we expect to get communications back with the crew on board the International Space Station. Everything up there, the International Space Station itself and the SpaceX Dragon are thought to be in a good configuration. So it'll just mean backing up in the procedure and starting back at the 30-meter hold point. That's where the Dragon had been hanging out for a while as the crews went through some checks. It did get the go-ahead to move into the 10-meter point, but about the time that it arrived there, the 10-meter point being the capture point where the space station's robotic arm can grab onto it. About the time that it got to that 10-meter point is when we had the communications problem with the teacher satellite, and so now it has since backed back up to the 30-meter point, about 98 feet away from the International Space Station. And once we do get communications back with the crew, we'll start over there and move back into the 10-meter, which will allow the space station's robotic arm to grab onto it, driven by Commander Alex Gerst and Flight Engineer Serena on Chancellor. Again, we expect to be able to get communications back just after 5:50 a.m. Central Time, so we'll be hanging out here with you until then, waiting for the next step in today's capture of the SpaceX Dragon.